what does the end of furlough mean for employers? The most obvious point here is that it means the removal of the financial crutch that has been provided to many employers throughout the COVID crisis. This has allowed many businesses to retain significant numbers of workers. About 7% of the workforce were on furlough through August 2021, and that equates to about 2 million workers. Obviously, the ending of furlough at the end of September is the potential for some significant consequences on levels of employment. COVID has affected industries such as hospitality and travel and leisure in particular. The ending of furlough to a large extent is going to force many employers to take decisions regarding staff that they've been deferring throughout the crisis, not had to take those decisions. For many employers, in my opinion, the option of retaining large numbers of staff will not be viable once furlough ends. The issue may not just be how many staff they retain at the end of furlough, but actually fundamentally the viability of their business. And that's going to have a consequence again on unemployment levels. The end of furlough and how that is going to affect the business landscape. There definitely will be opportunities for fitter, healthier, well-capitalized businesses who possibly have thrived through the crisis. Certain businesses, certain sectors that were classified as essential will have thrived. Flip side of that will be that there will be a resizing of certain industry sectors. Common theme for me will be hospitality, travel and leisure. Not all businesses within those sectors will be affected in the same way. There will be winners and losers. Not only will there be a resizing, there'll be a reshaping of businesses. And that is going to, for instance, the total number of business journeys over the next year will be smaller, in my opinion, than it was pre-pandemic. And that's going to affect certainly the travel industry, the leisure industry. And the winners here will be some technology businesses. I think the large techs such as Zoom, Microsoft Teams, been hugely successful and responded with rapid product development throughout the pandemic crisis. And the offering now that we have, and we're hosting meetings such as this virtually, means that many employers will certainly be questioning the need to be sending people out on the same number of journeys for business. There will be other businesses in the landscape. How that will impact them. Certainly, there'll be business owners who somehow managed to keep their businesses going through the pandemic. These were businesses that would have been otherwise viable, but they've been hauled below the waterline as an analogy. They're going to have real difficulties once furlough ends. There are other businesses that were zombie businesses, essentially, were barely viable prior to the pandemic and have been kept going with support of furlough, with CBILS, bounce back loans. Other businesses that were viable, but because they've had to seek liquidity support, such as CBILS, bounce back loans, customer demand may not be as it was pre-pandemic, and they may just find the debt servicing cost just isn't viable anymore because the customer demand isn't there anymore. They've managed to navigate through the pandemic, but now you have to start paying back the monies that have been borrowed, and their balance sheets may be stressed. Certainly, the other consequences of that will be that where they otherwise would have made or wanted to make investment decisions, they may not have the capacity to make those investments. And so that will impact business activity. I think the thing that I think Denise alluded to, really one of the big things now that we're seeing is inflationary pressure. So we're coming to the end of furlough. We've just had the sharpest monthly increase on record in inflation. The pressures are going to be coming from food inflation, coming from fuel price inflation, from energy inflation. So examples of food inflation, I heard a Manchester Billingsgate fish market trader last week on Radio 2 saying that the cost of a container of produce had increased from £3,000 to £14,000. I mean, that's a massive increase at 400% plus, if my maths is correct. Fuel prices have increased by over 15%, the forecourt prices, since the beginning of the year. Beginning of the year, around 117, 120, now close to 140 per litre. I guess the current big elephant in the room, which is the energy prices and the gas wholesale prices, they've gone up by over 250% since the beginning of the year, and 70% since August alone. We have some 1.2 million gas customers that are now in a position where they are having to be reallocated to different gas suppliers. Those customers will not be able to enjoy the same tariffs that they were on under the previous suppliers who've gone bust, and there are more in the pipeline according to official reports. That's going to cause massive upward inflationary pressure. Come on to, will we enter recession at the end of furlough? Recession, I mean, technical recession is 2 quarters of economic contraction. That's the definition. And so for reframing that question is, will the ending of furlough lead to 6 months of economic contraction? My opinion is that certainly Q4 this year, we will see economic contraction. So immediately following the ending of furlough, partly for the reasons I've sort of highlighted, part of my points to the previous question, we've got high levels of inflationary pressure. Adding to that, we've had yesterday BP announcing temporary closure of a number of forecourts. We have, for the same reason that supermarket shelves are empty, which is a shortage of drivers. And that's not going to go away very quickly. It takes quite a long time to train up HGV drivers. Traditionally, when unemployment is high, inflationary pressure on wages tends to be low, and that, in my opinion, isn't going to be the case this time. That's something called the Phillips curve, for those of you who may be interested. Come to the end of furlough, businesses have to take the decisions as to, can they retain large numbers of staff? Allied to that, COVID hasn't gone away. Furlough support is ending, but COVID, we've had the Delta, we now have something called the Mu variant. I think they're still looking at it, may be more infectious, may worryingly be resistant to existing vaccines. And coming onto the vaccine program, I mean, that has been a huge success. But these new variants mean that we cannot consider that we're sort of through this anytime soon. The situation is very dynamic. Crystal ball gazing, as I'm on in the spotlight, do I think there will be a recession? I think there's a high chance that over the next 2 quarters, we will have economic contraction. It'll be interesting to see what happens in January, February. I think Q4 for sure this year, we're going to see economic contraction. I think to a large extent, it's going to depend on how businesses and employers respond to the challenges of no more furlough support. How many of them are actually proactive, or how many of them are reactive and have had heads in the sand and have taken the support, and now suddenly they're going to have to manage their way through? Wouldn't have an insight into that. I think you get people who are good at planning, and you get people who are less good at planning in all industry sectors. I certainly think we're in for interesting times economically over the next 6 months. And there is just so much uncertainty. Throwing into the mix is the climate summit, I think, in Glasgow, which Mr. Johnson is hosting, and what the outcome of that is likely to be, what the consequences of the decisions taken there are, and how energy markets react to that, who knows? There's so much going on. I imagine business planning is going to be interesting for the next 2 quarters, and I strongly suspect that we will be in recession.